Good evening. As daylight fades and calm settles in, let us reflect on a pivotal development on the global stage. At the center of tonight's reflection is a delicate gesture in international diplomacy. Former President Donald Trump's reported efforts to bridge dialogue between Israel and Iran amid long-standing tensions in the Middle East. This story brings together echoes of past peace efforts, recent regional shifts, and the quiet backdrop of the G7 summit currently unfolding in Canada. In the sections that follow, we will gently trace the historical currents that brought us here, explore the nuances of this diplomatic overture, and imagine what small, hopeful steps might emerge. Let's take this journey at a calming pace, focused not on spectacle, but on understanding. To grasp today's moment, we must return briefly to the past, not as a burden, but as a guide. The notion of Trump re-engaging in Middle Eastern diplomacy flows from years of shifting alliances, cautious agreements, and deeply rooted rivalries. And now, as world leaders convene in Montreal for the G7, the backdrop feels especially relevant. According to multiple media reports, Trump, still a prominent political figure and likely contender in the 2024 US election, is exploring informal channels to propose a regional reconciliation framework involving Israel, Iran, and potentially Gulf states such as Saudi Arabia. This comes in the wake of regional tension, including aerial incidents in Syria, increased rhetoric between Israeli and Iranian leaders, and quiet cyber developments affecting infrastructure. Trump's approach reportedly leans on his prior relationships with leaders such as Benjamin Netanyahu and Gulf intermediaries. While the current administration under President Biden has expressed skepticism, some European officials have acknowledged a cautious interest in the conversations being initiated. These early signals do not reflect official negotiations, but rather exploratory dialogue, small gestures that may or may not take root. Observers note that Trump may be positioning this effort as an extension of his earlier work on the Abraham Accords agreements that brought normalization between Israel and several Arab states. Though this current initiative is more speculative and lacks formal structure, it appears to be aimed at initiating mutual restraint rather than producing treaties. What makes this story noteworthy tonight is not just the politics, it's the quiet human impulse beneath it, the search for reduced tension in one of the world's most fragile regions. To include Iran in such discussions adds a layer of complexity rarely seen in past efforts. Mutual suspicion, proxy engagements, and ideological divergence run deep. Yet, the act of initiating a conversation, however informal, is not insignificant. Let us now look gently at the forces shaping this moment. Several converging factors may be motivating this tentative diplomatic gesture. Iran continues to face economic and political pressures, including a weakened currency and high youth unemployment. While there has been no official comment from Iranian leadership, some Western diplomats interpret recent media and government tones as cautiously open to indirect talks focused on de-escalation, not full normalization. Israel, meanwhile, remains concerned about Iran's role in the region, particularly its activities in Syria and its support for Hezbollah. Yet Prime Minister Netanyahu, navigating internal political tensions and protest movements, may also find value in external diplomatic distractions that do not require immediate concessions. Trump's outreach, according to reports, involves communication through traditionally neutral countries such as Oman and Qatar nations, known for maintaining steady diplomatic channels. The proposal reportedly outlines a phased approach focused on economic incentives, limited de-escalation commitments, and mutual security reassurances. While not formal diplomacy, such gestures can open windows to trust building. Critics argue that such efforts risk appearing to legitimize Iran's actions without accountability. Ongoing concerns over uranium enrichment and proxy conflicts make any attempt at dialogue politically sensitive. Still others suggest that informal openings, however unconventional, can break long-standing deadlocks. A European diplomat noted, "Sometimes it takes unorthodox voices to start the conversations others avoid." Trump's earlier engagement with North Korea, while controversial, is often cited as an example of diplomacy outside traditional frameworks. Despite the skepticism, small signs of engagement are emerging. Israeli sources indicate a willingness to review the framework not as endorsement, but as recognition. In Iran, rare editorials calling for strategic patience in foreign affairs suggest subtle shifts in tone. These are early signals, fragile and easily overlooked. And yet they matter. As night deepens, we turn now to the quiet power of imagination. Not to predict, but to ponder what might happen if even a partial pause in hostilities takes hold. What if, for example, Israel and Iran, without formal agreement, mutually reduce tensions for 6 months? Even a temporary calm could bring relief to communities living under the threat of escalation from southern Lebanon to northern Israel. The absence of nightly air raid sirens would be a gift of quiet. What if these informal efforts allow the United States across partisan lines to re-engage Iran on narrower nuclear terms, perhaps not as broad as the JCPOA, but focused on risk reduction and regional stability? Such steps could be modest but meaningful. And what if these gestures, however limited, inspire new dialogue between people? A virtual seminar between students in Tel Aviv and Tehran. A collaborative environmental project in a third country. These human moments are small but powerful. Of course, this path may not hold. Hostilities could return, but even failed efforts can teach. The next attempt by the next leader may draw from the quiet lessons of this one. In this spirit, we return gently to the present. As we close tonight, let us reflect not only on geopolitics, but on perseverance. Donald Trump's attempt to stir quiet engagement between long-standing rivals may not transform the region. It may not even last the season. But it represents an enduring human impulse to talk rather than strike, to suggest rather than demand, to seek calm rather than chaos. The headlines may move quickly, but peace moves slowly. It often begins not in grand declarations, but in quiet questions and the courage to listen. May we carry this spirit into our own interactions and remember that even the softest voice can be the start of something enduring. Wishing you peace tonight, and the steady hope that in a world full of noise, calm still finds its way. Good night. Link to https://www.nbc.com. Opinion SNBC. Opinion Trump Doge Senate Rescission Bill CNA 212870. Good evening. It's peaceful to find this moment of calm as soft shadows lengthen across the sky. Tonight, we'll explore a quietly unfolding story from Washington, a modesty at significant push by congressional Republicans, encouraged by former President Donald Trump to reclaim previously approved funding. It's a story about fiscal philosophy, public services, and the art of reflection, set against a calm yet thoughtful current in national governance. Here's the snapshot. The House has passed a rescission bill, essentially a rollback of $9.4 billion in federal spending allocated earlier this year. It retraces funds from areas such as unused COVID-19 relief, foreign aid, and support for public broadcasting entities like NPR and PBS. Framed by proponents as fiscal prudence and by critics as potentially harmful to community and global programs, this bill now moves to the Senate for further consideration. Tonight we set aside alarm. We listen instead with curiosity to the choices behind the policy, the values they reflect, and what they quietly signal about the direction of governance. Let's begin this journey gently. The rescission bill passed in the House on June 13, 2025, reclaims $9.4 billion in appropriated funds. It targets unspent pandemic relief, select international aid programs, and funding for public media. Though modest in scale compared to the total federal budget, its symbolism is significant. Former President Trump, whose policy influence remains strong, has advocated a leaner vision of government, frequently characterizing certain expenditures as wasteful or misaligned with domestic priorities. This legislative move aligns with that perspective. The House vote reflected partisan lines. Most Republicans supported it, most Democrats opposed. Within this alignment lies a broader philosophical debate. Should government retract its support from long-standing institutions or continue investing, even as deficits loom? Among the targeted funds, public media stands out. NPR and PBS, supported through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, serve rural communities, educational programming, and local journalism. Opponents of the bill worry about diminishing trusted sources of information and cultural connection. Supporters argue that the private sector now offers sufficient media alternatives and government funding should reflect evolving media landscapes. Similarly, the proposed pullback on foreign assistance has drawn attention. Critics note that development aid bolsters democratic institutions and global stability, particularly in regions where U.S. soft power competes with that of other nations. Yet advocates for the bill assert that fiscal restraint itself is a form of strength, suggesting that reining in spending demonstrates global leadership through example. Prominent figures like Elon Musk have voiced broader critiques of federal spending, labeling large packages, including the original $1.2 trillion, from which these rescissions stem, as excessive. While not directly involved in the legislation, such commentary adds to a climate of skepticism surrounding expansive budgets. This bill may ultimately stall in the Senate, where the balance of power favors Democrats. Yet the act of passing it in the House carries weight. It signals a revived appetite for selective austerity, the kind often overshadowed by larger debates. To reflect further, we must look beyond the figures. What does this bill suggest about shifting governance norms? Perhaps it marks a return to fiscal messaging as a political pillar, not with sweeping reforms, but with incremental adjustments. Rescissions permitted under the 1974 Impoundment Control Act are rare. That this method is being reactivated suggests an intentional attempt to revisit, not just pass policy. It reflects a strategic effort to redefine not only what government does, but what it undoes. In this light, public broadcasting becomes more than a budget line. It symbolizes differing views on access to information and the role of state-supported culture. And foreign aid becomes a lens through which to consider how the US maintains presence abroad, not just militarily, but morally and diplomatically. The debate is not new, but the volume is lower now, less outrage, fewer protests. That in itself is notable. In a noisy political era, this quiet moment might represent a new phase of measured behind-the-scenes recalibration. Now we gently turn to imagination. What if the Senate swiftly approved the bill? Would it usher in a wave of renewed fiscal restraint or signal to local broadcasters and NGOs that their support was no longer guaranteed? Would such a change unfold dramatically or simply as a quiet reduction in services? Conversely, what if the bill is blocked? Would it embolden those who argue for expanded government investment, reinforcing a vision of the US as a globally engaged, domestically generous state? Or would it simply reaffirm the complexities of bipartisan governance in a divided political landscape? And perhaps most subtly, what if this bill is remembered not for its passage or failure, but for reintroducing a method, a mindset? What if its legacy is not immediate, but cumulative? A quiet influence on future budgeting efforts, campaign rhetoric, or civic expectations? As night settles, we close this reflection with a final thought: in governance, moments of restraint are as meaningful as moments of expansion. This rescission bill, however modest, offers insight into how priorities are quietly shifting. Whether or not it becomes law, it prompts essential questions about value, legacy, and the stories we tell ourselves about public good. May we continue to listen not just to the loud declarations, but also to the calm revisions, for in them too a democracy speaks. Good night, good evening. As the world outside quiets down, we begin tonight's reflection with gentleness and clarity. Our focus is on recent developments in the Middle East, where rising tensions between Israel and Iran have drawn international concern. This overview is intended not to provoke anxiety, but to offer understanding through verified facts and measured insight. In recent days, a significant escalation occurred between Iran and Israel. According to reports from Reuters, AP News, and BBC, Iran launched a large-scale missile attack targeting Israeli cities, including Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Petah Tikva. These attacks resulted in civilian casualties, with Israeli emergency services confirming at least 8 deaths and numerous injuries. In response, the Israeli Defense Forces (IDF) initiated a targeted military operation, striking facilities in Iran believed to be connected to missile storage and production. The Israeli strikes reached areas near Isfahan, a region known for its military infrastructure. Satellite images reviewed by multiple news organizations indicated that some facilities suffered significant damage. Neither country has declared a formal war. Both governments described their actions as retaliatory and framed them as measures of defense and deterrence. The global reaction has been one of deep concern. The United States, a key ally of Israel, called for de-escalation. Secretary of State Antony Blinken emphasized the importance of restraint and the protection of civilians. The European Union echoed this sentiment, urging both nations to engage in diplomatic dialogue. Other nations have responded based on their regional positions. Russia and China, which maintain ties with Iran, called for peace and stability. Meanwhile, Countries in the Gulf region, such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE, issued neutral but concerned statements highlighting the risks of a wider conflict. Back-channel communications have reportedly been established among Washington, Tel Aviv, Tehran, and Doha, aiming to explore possible steps toward de-escalation. This escalation is part of a long-standing rivalry. Israel has long viewed Iran's support for groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and militant factions in Syria and Gaza as a direct threat. On the other hand, Iranian leadership has expressed distrust toward Israel and its Western allies. Recent intelligence analyses reported by BBC and The Guardian suggest that Iran had repositioned missile systems near its borders, raising alarms in Israel. Internally, Iran has been under economic strain due to sanctions, and some analysts believe this contributed to its more assertive regional posture. In Israel, national security concerns remain heightened, especially in densely populated areas. The Iron Dome defense system intercepted many incoming missiles, yet civilians experienced significant disruptions. While political and military strategies dominate headlines, the human side of this conflict remains central. Families in both Iran and Israel are affected. In Tel Aviv, families sheltered in bunkers. In Tehran, some residents faced uncertainty and power disruptions. Non-governmental organizations have called for greater efforts to protect civilians and ensure humanitarian corridors remain open. Mental health professionals in the region are emphasizing the need for community support as populations cope with stress and trauma. Even amid uncertainty, stories of ordinary resilience shine through. Teachers, doctors, parents, and volunteers across the region continue to care for others, choosing compassion in moments of fear. As we conclude tonight's reflection, let us hold space for peace. While we acknowledge the complexity of these events, we also recognize the shared humanity that binds people on both sides. In a world shaped by conflict and connection, understanding remains a powerful tool. Good night, and may tomorrow bring steadier ground. Good evening. As daylight gives way to quiet evening skies, I invite you to settle in and ease into tonight's reflections, guided by the warm glow of thoughtful calm. This gentle moment is our canvas tonight. We'll explore the unfolding scene from the G7 summit in Canada, where President Trump and global leaders gather amid undercurrents of change. Rather than headlines, we seek insight, softly unwrapping trade tensions, diplomatic rhythms, and the quiet pulse of global cooperation. Our journey tonight will glide through 5 sections. We begin here with a soft introduction, the heartbeat of what truly matters. Next, we'll gently dive into the summit's unfolding narrative, trade, tariffs, migration, and alliances, all viewed with a balanced lens. From there, we will offer deeper end-of-day analysis, exploring what drove recent decisions, who might feel their impact, and where encouragement quietly emerges. Then, we'll drift into hypothetical what-ifs, exploring imagined pathways without alarm, just curiosity. Finally, we'll close on a note of continuity and rest, soothing hopes for tomorrow. If you felt the echo of tension in the world today, allow this to be a moment of thoughtful repose, a lullaby of understanding. And so we begin again, expanding the first section a bit further, soothingly repeating its central ideas. Tonight, we breathe into calm clarity, scanning across trade diplomacy and quiet optimism as world events unfold. As we move beyond the gentle curtain of introduction, let us now wade deeper into the waters of this week's G7 summit in Charlevoix, Canada. gathering of the world's largest advanced economies, each bringing its own vision, its own tensions, and its own quiet hopes. Though the grandeur of international summits often makes headlines for spectacle tonight, we look for subtler cues, gestures exchanged in quiet corridors, statements layered with intention, and the slow churn of policy amid the pulse of politics. President Donald Trump's presence at the G7 has once again stirred waves. His approach to international diplomacy diverges from traditional norms, favoring bluntness over consensus, bilateral negotiation over multilateral strategy. This year's summit, though meant to emphasize common goals, climate change, global security, and economic resilience, has been weighted with the stress of tariffs and trade tensions, particularly between the United States and its closest allies, Canada, France, Germany, and Japan. At the heart of the issue lies the Trump administration's insistence on recalibrating trade relationships. Recent steel and aluminum tariffs imposed by the US have rippled through the global economy, drawing criticism from both allies and adversaries. The rationale offered by the administration is one of sovereignty and self-protection, aiming to reduce trade deficits and revive domestic industries. However, among the G7, where economic interdependence is the norm, such policies can feel like fractures rather than reforms. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, hosting this year's summit, has voiced both restraint and resolve. His efforts to preserve the multilateral spirit of the G7 contrast with President Trump's America First messaging, which has often signaled skepticism toward international institutions. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron has stressed unity and values-driven cooperation, suggesting that true strength arises not from unilateral moves, but from collective trust. Behind these diplomatic expressions lie real implications for businesses adjusting to shifting tariffs, for farmers whose exports may lose markets, and for global financial systems gauging uncertainty. Yet amid these concerns, there remains a rhythm of continuity trade between G7 nations, while tense has proven resilient. Most nations have responded with caution rather than confrontation, signaling that even under strain, global diplomacy finds pathways to endurance. Alongside trade, immigration has also surfaced, subtly yet significantly, as a point of divergence. European leaders, still managing the aftershocks of large-scale migration flows, promote cooperative frameworks and humanitarian responsibility. President Trump, however, emphasizes border control and national sovereignty, echoing his domestic policies. These opposing stances, though not explosive, reflect deeper philosophical divides. Iran and the Israel-Gaza conflict have also entered the margins of summit discussion. Though not primary agenda items, they have offered space for quiet alignment or divergence. President Trump's stance on Israel remains firm, drawing applause from certain allies and caution from others. Meanwhile, European leaders continue to defend the Iran nuclear agreement zone, which the US withdrew from under Trump's direction, highlighting the nuanced diplomacy at play. It's worth noting that even amidst these divergences, no single voice dominates entirely. Rather, the G7 stage serves as a kind of subdued theatre where leaders perform not for applause, but for influence. Their audience includes global markets, regional partners, and domestic constituents, all watching to see whether unity will withstand dissonance. What lingers beneath these events is not only the question of what will happen next, but how the tone of international politics is being reshaped, not necessarily through dramatic rupture, but through small, sustained shifts. And this perhaps is where our attention should gently settle tonight. As we carry this awareness forward, let us allow the quiet patterns of diplomacy to guide us into the next phase. Understanding the deeper causes behind these developments, their potential ripple effects, and the subtle, sometimes surprising places where hope may still reside. Link 5 https www.nbcnews.com World Middle East Live Blog Israel-Iran Live Updates New Attacks Conflict Enters Fourth Day RCNA 213182/RCRD 82494. Good evening. I'm glad you're here, ready to settle in after a full day, and I invite you to join me in a pause, a calm, reflective moment, to gently explore today's evolving story from the Middle East. Tonight, we'll turn our attention to a region where long-standing tensions have rippled into deeper conflict, a realm of strategic decisions, human concerns, and paths toward resolution. Picture this night skies over Tehran, alight with defensive flares, families pausing in their routines, hearts quietly hoping for safety. In faraway capitals, leaders lean in, weighing moves and counter-moves. As the world holds its breath, we'll walk through the developments with patience and perspective, avoiding alarm while understanding why each moment matters. In the coming sections, we'll explore first what unfolded today, the key events and statements. Then we'll look beneath the surface. How did this escalate and who is affected? We'll also gently lay out possible directions. This might take what if diplomacy re-enters or if the pattern continues. Finally, we'll return to a place of hope, acknowledging the endurance in communities and the possibilities that lie ahead. Throughout, I aim for a soothing rhythm, lulling with knowledge as it were, even when discussing serious challenges. You can expect carefully weighed views, modest optimism, and a measured pace that encourages reflection rather than alarm. To begin, here's a soft but compelling snapshot. On June 13th, Israel launched a significant aerial campaign dubbed Operation Rising Lion against multiple Iranian military and nuclear sites, aiming to delay Iran's capacity to enrich uranium. Over 200 aircraft struck roughly 100 targets, including Natanz and Tehran area installations. Israeli officials described this as a preventive strike meant to forestall a potential nuclear threat. In response, Iran fired dozens of ballistic missiles and drones in what became Operation True Promise 3, targeting central Israel. While a substantial number were intercepted, unfortunately several broke through, leading to civilian casualties, at least 24 lives lost, and many injured across Israel. This military exchange has extended into a fourth day, with nighttime rocket fire and air defenses active in many areas. Israeli airstrikes reportedly damaged Iranian enrichment installations and killed senior military officers, while Iranian attacks hit residential areas and even a school in Tel Aviv. In the midst of this, US President Donald Trump, attending the G7 summit in Canada, urged residents of Tehran to evacuate, flagged Iran should not be permitted to develop nuclear weapons, and put American military assets, including a second aircraft carrier, USS Nimitz, on standby in the region. Diplomatic voices have begun to speak softly yet insistently. French President Emmanuel Macron, also at the G7, mentioned a ceasefire proposal contingent on Israeli de-escalation. Gulf states such as Oman and Qatar have quietly offered to mediate. International bodies emphasize civilian protection. Tonight we'll unpack what underlies these moves and what possibilities lie ahead. Each step matters. Weapons, words, and warnings echo far beyond borders. Yet amid concern, there is space for careful deliberation, humanity, and the seeds of diplomacy. Let this opening be your invitation to rest, to reflect, and to gently understand. You've done enough for one day. Now let's continue in this spirit. As we gently continue our journey into tonight's story, let's begin to understand how the latest wave of conflict between Israel and Iran came to be not in bursts of noise, but through a quiet, step-by-step unfolding of context. Much like the movements of a tide, what we see now is the cresting of patterns set in motion over time. To truly understand the fourth day of hostilities between the two nations, we must begin weeks, even months earlier, before the missiles and statements, before the flames over Natanz and the black smoke trailing above Tel Aviv. The seeds were visible. For years, Israel has viewed Iran's nuclear ambitions as an existential threat, a red line in its national security doctrine. Despite reassurances from Iran that its nuclear program remains peaceful, Israeli intelligence has consistently cited evidence suggesting otherwise: secret uranium enrichment, missile delivery testing, and the presence of military oversight at enrichment facilities. Meanwhile, Iran has long regarded Israel as a proxy of Western pressure and has cultivated regional alliances, supporting Hezbollah in Lebanon, backing militias in Syria and Iraq, and seeking deeper ties with Russia and China. These alliances, while not uniform in agenda, have emboldened Tehran's regional posture. In the past month, UN observers noted a marked increase in activity at Iran's underground Fordow and Natanz sites. Centrifuges were spinning at levels well beyond those permitted under the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action (JCPOA), an agreement the US exited in 2018 during Trump's first term. Intelligence reports later leaked suggested Iran was within months, perhaps weeks, of reaching weapons-grade uranium enrichment. In response, Israel's defense establishment accelerated preparations. Its newly appointed defense minister, Avigdor Levy, a hawkish figure with strong ties to the Israeli Air Force, publicly vowed to act before Iran could cross the threshold. Behind closed doors, planning for Operation Rising Lion intensified. Then came June 13th. The pre-dawn Israeli airstrikes were sweeping and deliberate. Over 200 aircraft, including advanced F-35s and older F-15s, modified for electronic warfare, took off from bases across the Negev. They struck more than 100 site centrifuge fields, command bunkers, radar arrays. Videos later emerged showing mushrooming clouds near Natanz and the charred remains of command vehicles in western Tehran. Iran's response was both swift and deeply symbolic. Operation True Promise III was not only a military act, it was a statement of resilience, of parity. The name itself echoed past retaliatory campaigns, each designed to underscore that Tehran would not absorb such blows silently. The salvo of missiles launched toward Israel on June 14th included Fateh 110s, Shahab 3s, and the newer Emad missile medium range and difficult to intercept. Israeli Iron Dome and Arrow defense systems neutralized the majority, but several missiles penetrated the shields, striking civilian buildings in Tel Aviv and Ashkelon. A girls' school, an apartment block, and a hospital wing were damaged. The human cost became heartbreakingly clear: 24 killed, more than 60 injured, among them children. Across Israel, air raid sirens continued through the night. Citizens rushed into shelters where they remained for hours listening to the rumble above. Meanwhile, in Tehran, similar scenes played out: emergency broadcasts, sirens, families gathering in basements or dim corridors, hoping each sound wasn't the last. International reaction has ranged from carefully worded condemnation to diplomatic appeals. The US has taken a supportive stance toward Israel, but has stopped short of calling for full-scale involvement. Israel has a right to defend itself, Trump said from the G7 summit, but we urge all parties to de-escalate. He has since ordered the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower to reposition near the Strait of Hormuz, reinforcing a second carrier already stationed there. Intelligence aircraft have been conducting high-altitude reconnaissance runs over Syria and southern Iran, signaling that while the US is not entering the conflict directly, it is preparing for any scenario. Russia, in contrast, has called for immediate talks and expressed concern about regional destabilization. President Putin, appearing alongside China's Xi Jinping in a joint statement, emphasized respect for Iran's sovereign right to development and the avoidance of unilateral aggression. Europe's tone has been more fragmented. Germany, France, and the UK have all condemned the loss of civilian life, but internal debates rage on whether Israel's actions should be considered proportionate or preventive. Quiet talks are underway to broker a ceasefire, possibly through intermediaries like Oman or Switzerland. And so, as rockets streak across skies and voices rise from podiums, what began as calculated strategy now drifts toward unintended consequences. Public sentiment in both nations is evolving. In Israel, rallies call for government accountability, even as support for the military remains high. In Iran, state media hails resistance, but economic anxieties grow louder. Sanctions have left the economy fragile, and now infrastructure faces fresh damage. But amid the escalating rhetoric, quieter stories emerge of families helping strangers in shelters, of doctors working double shifts, of volunteers distributing water and food. These quieter acts remind us beyond governments and missiles are people, and it is their resilience that often carries nations through the storm. This, then, is where we stand, not at a definitive turning point, but within a moment that demands attention and care. The next hours and days will shape what follows, but we need not rush to predict. Tonight, we rest in understanding. As we gently return to our reflection, let us now explore the deeper roots and broader implications of this conflict. The fourth day of military exchanges between Israel and Iran is not simply a matter of military strikes and missile counts. It is a signal reverberating across diplomacy, security strategy, public consciousness, and regional dynamics. Why did this happen truly? The surface answer points to enrichment levels, red lines crossed, and preemptive defense doctrines. But beneath those are patterns of mistrust built over decades. The memory of Iran's 1979 revolution, the subsequent hostage crisis, and decades of Western sanctions still shape Tehran's posture. Likewise, Israel's experiences, from the Holocaust to regional wars, have fostered a doctrine of forward defense threats are not to be allowed the luxury of maturity. For Israel, the urgency was not born last week. It emerged over time-layered intelligence pointing to advanced centrifuge arrays, satellite images of deepening bunkers, and the slow collapse of international oversight since the US exited the JCPOA. Each report added to the picture, and that picture in Israeli eyes began to look like a countdown. But it's worth asking, was military action the only path left? Some argue not. Diplomats close to the European Union note that quiet channels with Iran remained open even in recent months. Qatar, Oman, and even India maintained economic and informal ties, sometimes facilitating back-channel messages. These routes were delicate, often slow, but they did exist. And therein lies a quiet tension. How long should diplomacy be given before deterrence takes over? There is no universally satisfying answer. Iran's retaliation, too, did not emerge from impulse. Analysts note that Tehran likely had contingency plans ready, labeled and prepared. The selection of Operation True Promise 3 suggests a sense of continuity with past campaigns, notably the 2020 response to the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani. In those instances, retaliation was calculated to deliver pain while avoiding a broader war. The logic remains to assert capacity, but not to escalate beyond a point of return. So who is impacted? The obvious and immediate answer is civilians. In both countries, it is everyday people, children, workers, elderly, who are now navigating shelters, sirens, power outages, and grief. In Israel, schools have closed in several regions. In Iran, mobile networks and electricity grids in several provinces near military sites are being rationed or shut temporarily. These effects ripple out emotionally, socially, and economically. But there are less visible consequences too. The global energy market, for example, has begun to respond. Oil prices rose 7% over the past 3 days, with Brent crude nearing $93 per barrel. This rise is not just due to immediate fears, but anticipatory shifts traders pricing in the potential closure of the Strait of Hormuz, through which nearly 1/3 of the world's seaborne oil passes. The US Navy's increased presence there, meant to ensure freedom of navigation, is as much a signal to markets as to military actors. Another layer is diplomatic realignment. In the weeks before this conflict, there were notable developments. Iran signed a new trade corridor agreement with Russia and Kazakhstan. Israel was in quiet normalization talks with Saudi Arabia, encouraged by Washington. These subtle moves are now paused or altered. The Saudi government, for instance, has not issued a direct statement supporting either side. But unofficial media channels have shifted tone, focusing more on civilian suffering than strategic justification. That is a message in itself. Regional powers are watching not only what is done, but how it is perceived. Meanwhile, the US faces its own complexity. Former President Donald Trump's comments from the G7 warning Iran against nuclear weapons development, urging citizens to flee Tehran, and affirming Israel's right to act being interpreted as continuity in his doctrine of preemption and pressure. But his language also hints at calculated restraint. He has not called for full-scale US engagement. That distinction matters. Domestically, these events will echo in political debates. Some members of Congress have already raised questions about the legality of Israeli preemptive strikes without direct provocation. Others have supported Israel's right to self-defense. As the 2026 election cycle draws near, this issue may shape broader discourse around military aid alliance frameworks and the US role in Middle Eastern stability. Amid all this, what are the positive aspects, if any? Surprisingly, there are some. International mediation is not absent. Oman's foreign ministry is reportedly in talks with both parties, seeking to broker a humanitarian ceasefire to allow aid delivery and medical support in affected areas. France and Germany have backed this call. The UN Secretary-General has urged both sides to adhere to international humanitarian law. These are not solutions, but signals that amid crisis, institutions still function, voices still rise for peace. Within Israel and Iran, civic resilience has been noteworthy. Israeli hospitals have launched 24-hour emergency protocols and opened shelters for displaced families. In Iran, volunteer networks, some dating back to COVID-era relief efforts, are reactivating, delivering water batteries and medical supplies to impacted zones. In both societies, beneath political narratives, a sense of duty to community persists. This perhaps is where perspective is most vital. While leaders deliberate and armies mobilize, the heartbeat of these nations lies in classrooms, kitchens, clinics. It lies in the father in Ashdod who reassures his daughter as sirens wail, in the nurse in Esfahan who refuses to leave her shift despite the rumble outside, in quiet acts of everyday courage woven into a broader human fabric. And yet we must ask what might follow. As the next part explores, we will step into what-ifs, but not to worry. We will stay grounded, thoughtful and calm. This moment is serious, but not without hope. Understanding is the first step toward wisdom. When you're ready, say continue, and we'll explore a few careful scenarios, gentle thought experiments that might help illuminate the horizon. Now that we have walked steadily through the unfolding events and their deeper currents, let us pause and look gently toward the horizon. In this part, we imagine, not in fear, but in thoughtfulness. What if scenarios are not predictions? They are quiet invitations to understand how choices might ripple forward. Let's consider 3 paths each possible, each carrying its own shape of consequence. What if diplomacy finds an opening? Suppose in the coming days, mediators succeed in establishing a temporary ceasefire, perhaps a 72-hour humanitarian pause. During that window, international observers and humanitarian aid could reach damaged areas in Israel and Iran. Civilian needs might be met more fully. With lowered tension, even temporarily, channels for dialogue via Oman, Qatar, or the UN could begin to deepen. In that version of events, neither side concedes defeat. Instead, they claim a kind of moral advantage, Israel having demonstrated its deterrence capability, Iran having shown its readiness to respond. It would not solve the nuclear question, but it might de-escalate further violence and reintroduce space for diplomacy. In a region where mutual trust is scarce, even a pause is precious. What if escalation continues? This is the scenario most fear, and rightly so. Continued rocket attacks, more airstrikes, and a broader regional involvement, perhaps by Hezbollah from Lebanon or militias in Iraq, could draw Israel into multiple front warfare. In turn, Iran might suffer further strategic damage to its military infrastructure. Casualties would mount. The humanitarian toll could deepen. If the US becomes involved militarily, even in a limited capacity, global markets might react sharply. Oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz could be disrupted. Stock markets could tremble. A broader war would strain not only governments, but people everywhere through prices, migration, and anxiety. Yet even this darker path contains points of potential moderation. None of the major powers, China, Russia, the EU, nor even the US, have shown appetite for prolonged conflict. The pressure to find off-ramps would grow. Quiet diplomacy often moves fastest in moments of acute crisis. What if internal dynamics change the course? Another possibility lies within. Public opinion in both Israel and Iran may shift rapidly. In Israel, citizens may demand that the government avoid extended war, especially if attacks continue harming civilians. In Iran, protests or pressure may rise if economic pain deepens or infrastructure collapses further. Internal pressure, while unpredictable, often creates the greatest leverage for change. It reminds leaders that wars are not fought in abstract but on the ground among families and futures. These scenarios are not blueprints. They are doorways, each opening to paths that will be shaped not by force alone, but by wisdom, restraint, and collective will. As we drift toward the final part of tonight's reflection, let us carry this thought gently. The future is not fixed, and even in hardened conflicts, choices remain.